morning and welcome to Highway Christian Fellowship Online. It's a joy to be with you today from your home or wherever you are watching this stream. I'm Pastor Ralph, the pastor here at Highway, and it's my privilege to be part of your day today. We trust that today's message by Pastor Phil will be an encouragement to you in your walk of faith. If you would like more information concerning our church, our ministries, how to connect with a pastor, or to give safely online, you can connect with us at hcfsydney.ca, and you can follow the links to our ministries page, how to connect with a pastor, or to give. We look forward to being a service to you and to your family. We also believe that it's important and essential for people to come together in community. So we invite you, if you are in the Sydney or Peninsula area and you may be looking for a church home, we invite you to join us for our in-person Sunday morning service at 10:30. We are located at 10364 McDonald Park Road, right in between the airport and the ferry. We look forward to hearing from you and seeing you soon. God bless, and let's enjoy today's message.
There are people alive today among us who their job is to hop into vans and to chase weather events like big snowstorms, ice storms, tornadoes, tsunamis, all that thing, in order to track, report, and investigate all of these weather events. Now, sometimes they get there and nothing would happen, right? The tornado doesn't show up. It just doesn't quite pan out. Sometimes they'd be late. They'd be in the wrong location and they'd be finding it around. But if they were lucky, they would get to experience the awesome power of nature up close and personal, right? And how incredible would that be? And then it'd end. And it'd be quiet. And they get back in their vans, they pack up all their gear, and then they go chase the next one. And then they go chase the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And for our purposes this morning, I think that that's actually a pretty good lens for us to arrive at our teaching text. We are in a series called Signposts, and we're going to be camping out in John chapter 6. And here we're going to find within this chapter, within this story, one of the more iconic Jesus moments. We're going to be interacting with Jesus feeding the 5,000. So, it's good to know going in that this is the only miracle before Jesus' arrest and his crucifixion and resurrection. This is the only miracle that is recorded in all four Gospels. So it's not only significant enough that just John would write it in, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke all have it in their story of Jesus. As we're reading this and as we're recognizing this should cause us to lean in and ask ourselves, what is this story trying to tell us? What is God trying to reveal to us? And so are we ready to lean in this morning and hear what the Spirit is saying? Good. Let's look at the story together. We're going to start in verse 1, chapter 6, verse 1. It's going to be on the screen behind me here. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. It's interesting, what were the crowds doing? They were following him. Why? Because they saw signs. Because they saw miracles. They were storm chasing. They were sign chasing. They wanted to see what Jesus would do next. They wanted to be a part of what awesome thing Jesus was going to do around the corner. And maybe this is how you became introduced to Jesus. Or maybe it was the hook that brought you into the door of faith. And there's nothing wrong with this. I want to be clear about that. Perhaps you came to church out of crisis or addiction and you needed a powerful environment. Perhaps you signed up for a course or joined a life group in an attempt to save or strengthen your marriage. Maybe you're holding out hope this morning that Jesus will cure you from depression or anxiety or a physical ailment affecting your body. There are all sorts of reasons why we might follow the hope of the signs and miracles that draw us toward faith. And as we read the biblical story, we know that this is common for Jesus. Jesus had lots of followers around as he was raising the dead, casting out demons, healing the sick, walking on water. People wanted to know what Jesus was going to do next. They wanted to be a part of it, right? But John, the author of this gospel, understood that the miracle was meeting a surface need. Hear me out. And he actually understood that these signs were pointing to something so much more. And this is why our anchor point through this series has been in John 20, verse 31. But these are written, all of these things are written, that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. And so the signs, the miracles, the wonders that Jesus was doing when he was walking the earth, they were temporary, right? They were localized. But what John was recognizing and what we're chasing, we don't just want the signs, right, church? We want the real thing. We want life. And what John is pointing to is that by believing in Jesus, that we will discover life. This is eternal. This is creation-wide. There's something deeper going on. And the truth is this. While the signs might get us into the door of faith, the miraculous wonders might cause us to investigate, they might not be what we actually need. Hear me out. Let me say it another way. Someone may have the perfect health. Someone may have the perfect job. Someone may have the perfect looks. Someone may have the perfect hair. Someone may have the perfect marriage. And yet even those individuals feel like there's something missing inside. Right? You can have it all, and yet there's still something inside us that is looking for more. The truth is that we are hungry for something, aren't we? And that hunger will drive us to some interesting places. I'm reminded of this commercial, series of commercials. I'm sure you've seen them. Have you seen the Snickers commercials? Where they'd be in like a normal situation. They'd be like at the workplace or, at a sports game or in someone's house, whatever. And this conversation would strike up, and then all of a sudden this like grouchy old actor, like totally out of place. I'm thinking like Danny Trejo is like dressed up like a 9-year-old girl, like brushing his hair, screaming, or Betty White's in the middle of a football huddle, like cussing out her teammates. And people are reacting to this fuss, and they take this actor aside and say, "Hey, you're not you when you're hungry." And then they hand them a Snickers bar. And they take this bite, and then the tagline shows up, "You're not you when you're hungry. Snickers satisfies," right? And I think that this, while we can relate to this, I think we can all relate to have the feeling of grouchy from being hungry. On a deeper level, I don't think this just describes the crowd in our story. It also describes us. The reality is that we are not ourselves, and we feel this at moments because we're looking for something to satisfy us. We're looking for something to make us whole, right? So the question becomes, what satisfies? Let's continue the story and see what the crowds following Jesus were hungry for, right? And so, like I said, this story is in all 4 Gospels. So allow me to paraphrase the story to incorporate some of these different elements. And so as the story goes, Jesus sees these crowds approaching, and the authors write that he was filled with compassion. And that caused him to stop what he was doing, and he began teaching the crowds, he began healing the sick amongst the crowd, and it was going on in the day, and after some time, people started to get hungry, right? And so the disciples are probably giving a sigh of relief, like, "Oh, thank you, this is as good a time as any." Jesus had to send these people home, but Jesus says, wait. Jesus had another plan. In fact, he was going to use this moment to set the scene, to show something really cool about himself. In fact, Jesus was setting his disciples up for a test of faith of sorts. He already knew how he was going to solve this unique problem, right? So the disciples look for what food there is, and they get a little bit of bread and a little bit of fish, and then they organize the crowds in groups of 50s and whatnot, and so they're all set out, organized, and then Jesus blesses the food, right? He says a blessing, multiplies the food. He gives the food to his disciples. The disciples start giving them out. And then it keeps going. And it keeps going, and it keeps going, and it keeps going. This food is miraculously multiplying, and we don't know how this looks, right? It doesn't detail us exactly how it multiplies. Does it like pop out of thin air? Does like the bread just never run out? We don't get those details, but we know that it happens. And in fact, there's so much multiplying going on that after everyone in the crowd is full, the disciples begin gathering all of the extras into baskets, and there are 12 whole baskets left over. And the crowd, these 5,000 people, they're so moved by this, they're so wowed by this, that they begin looking at each other and says, hey, this dude's the prophet. And they begin ready to take him up and make him their king. And then, in a final twist, Jesus sees this sentiment, intuits what's going on. He looks at his disciples and says, you guys got to get out of here. And he splits the scene as fast as he can. Now this is fascinating and strange, right? An incredible miracle. Like Jesus had done a lot of cool things. He'd been healing the sick, casting out demons. Like he'd never done something like this before. This miraculous miracle was followed by the quick exit. Why would Jesus, who from his birth was heralded as the promised coming king of Israel, this was in a sense his birthright, he had been set apart, why would he reject this chance to seize what is his? Why does he escape so fast, right? If you were a modern reader and all you have is this story, all you have is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you wouldn't be alone if you were left with some questions. Why did Jesus do what he did, right? A good way to think of this as we're interacting with these questions is, you'd be familiar, have any of you tried driving in a foreign country? I mean, you've gone overseas, you've gone to Mexico, and if you ever tried driving, how different that can be. Like there are cars, and there are roads, and that's familiar. But then when you really start driving, you recognize that the road lines are different. Maybe you're on the other side of the road. The signs in other countries have different symbols, and you don't really know what they mean. And they're in different languages, and there are different colors representing different things that you should and shouldn't do. So it's sort of familiar, but there's a lot that you lose in translation. And I think we can lose a lot in translation if we're just reading from this story. We have to go a little bit deeper, right? So what's going on here that this group of people would see Jesus multiply all of this bread and then suddenly call Jesus the prophet, right? What's going on here? Well, in chapter 6, verse 4, John, the author, gives us a clue to give some context here. And so we're going to see in John chapter 6, verse 4, that the Jewish Passover festival was near. For those of us who are unfamiliar with the Passover, this actually has its roots in an earlier biblical story. This is an Exodus story, and it's going to flesh out John's scene for us that he's writing in John chapter 6. You see, the Passover was this event in the history of Israel where God finally delivers on his promise to free Israel from Egyptian slavery, right? So Moses, Israel's leader, he's telling Israel, hey, listen, God has been talking to me, and I'm actually going to defeat Pharaoh. God is going to defeat Pharaoh by entering into Egypt and killing every firstborn, which is its own story. You should read Exodus. It's fascinating. But he says this, and then he says, in order for Israel to protect itself, I'm going to ask you to sacrifice a lamb, and you're going to brush its blood on your doorpost. And then what's going to happen is as my spirit passes over it, are we getting the connection here? Then those homes wouldn't experience the death that was coming. They were protected by the blood of the lamb. And this is like charging at the preacher in me right now. And so God took this Passover moment and he said, you guys need to create a festival to remember this. Make this a regular part of your calendar so it's something that you can remember and come back to over and over and over again. And remember how I delivered you from freedom. And they would do this for centuries, right up into the time where Jesus is interacting with these crowds. What's further, they would see Jesus multiplying this bread supernaturally. And they'd also be reminded of the time in Exodus where Moses was leading Israel through the wilderness. And they were grumbling, they were hungry. And God would provide this grain. It would just show up on the ground. And out of it, they'd make a type of bread they'd call manna. And for 40 years, God did this to help supply and provide food for his people when they were doing their nomadic wanderings through all that time. So, We're in John chapter 6, and this crowd, they're in Passover time, they're seeing this cue of multiplying bread, and then they would look to the source of that bread. And in their history, they would be reminded of the man who led them out of slavery and freedom, right? It would lead them naturally to that conclusion. They'd think of Moses, who was the leader of Israel, who would lead them out of slavery and into the promised, almost into the promised land. That's a whole other story. But Moses was God's prophet. But even throughout his life, Moses would point to a prophet to come. And so now we're making the connection of these stories, and the crowd is making the connection here. You have you see the source of bread. You would remind these stories and these rituals that they would perform. And we see that the Jewish people now, they had been in exile for hundreds of years. They hadn't had the promised land. It was taken away from them again. So for hundreds of years, they were in exile, longing for that freedom of Moses, longing for the freedom that the God of Moses provided for them. And we can understand and we can intuit that the people there weren't just hungry for bread. Right? They weren't simply hungry for a miracle. They were hungry for the God of Moses. They were hungry for freedom. There was something deeper that was going on. But even here, there's a problem. Because that sounds like a really good thing to hunger, for freedom. So why does Jesus take off? Like, he performs this awesome miracle, and it's loaded with historical and theological significance. This is such an awesome moment, and then he just pieces out. Could it be that Jesus knows something that we don't? In fact, I think he recognized that as they were making these conclusions of their mind about who Jesus was, that he could recognize that their hunger wasn't properly placed. Their hunger wasn't properly placed. Jesus had a different sort of mission. See, Jesus was on this mission to reconcile the world back unto God. But in some ways, this wasn't really the felt need of Israel. What was their felt need? They wanted to be free from Rome, right? They were an oppressed people. They wanted to be free from Rome. They wanted their promised land back. They wanted to be ruling over the world. And so they had come to interpret the promises of God. They had this expectation that God would return as a military leader strong enough to conquer the world and subject it back to the proper people of God. And so this scene in John chapter 6, when they call him the prophet, it is loaded with this expectation and this anticipation that's charging this up, maybe more than we realized. Near Passover, national zeal is at its highest. All of them, fresh on their mind, is the freedom that God had promised, the freedom that God had delivered. And they're like, Lord, do it again. Think of 4th of July on steroids, right? And then there's this weird subtext going on here. Maybe you've never seen. It was during my reading through this. I had heard of the number 5,000. You know, what is that significance? And we would draw, maybe you've heard the sermons or the stories that 5,000 men is a big deal, and that it's not just 5,000 men, right? It's their family. So maybe it's 10,000, maybe it's 20,000. Isn't it great that God can provide food for 20,000 people? But what I hadn't thought of is that perhaps 5,000 men, all organized into a group of 50, were mentioned because they would have looked a whole lot like a fighting force. From the sky's eye view, they might have looked like an army. And so when they go to sweep up Jesus to try and make him their king, Jesus pieces out of there because he doesn't want to get caught up in a crusade and a rebellion against Rome in that moment. Another gospel author, Mark, he notes something here. And these people are swept up in this anticipation and expectation. They had come to expect a sort of general, right? They had come to expect some kind of military leader, a general. But what they got in this moment was a cook. See, Jesus sees things a little bit differently, doesn't he? We note, Mark notes in his gospel that when he saw the crowds, he didn't look at them and he didn't see an army. We find from Luke that when he looked at them, he saw them like they were sheep without a shepherd. Like sheep without a shepherd. You see, we want rebellion, right? If we're honest. We want miracles. We want easy solutions. We want it to all work out. We want the bread. But God knows that we need his presence. God knows that we need his guidance. God knows that we doesn't need a general. We need a shepherd. But it's really easy for us to miss what satisfies our hunger. There's this cool trick that our body does. Did you know that your body will actually trick you into doing it? It'll try to trick you into doing what's good for you? This is really cool. So, have any of you ever had a craving, right? It just pops out of nowhere. Say you have like a craving for steak, and you don't know where it's coming from. You're not pregnant. There's nothing else going on. You just really want steak, right? See, what's going on is what your body recognizes is that you need iron. You're iron deficient. But you don't know that. So your brain will go into its like search engine, search history. It'll Google what gives me iron. It'll be reminded of a time when you got a good dose of iron from red meat. And then it will trigger that craving by association. So you don't know that your body needs iron, but your body does. Isn't that cool? Problem is that we can twist this really easily, right? We can twist this. When we aren't consciously aware of what our body truly needs, we can misinterpret the subconscious craving of I need iron to I need a snack. And then all of a sudden, your cupboard magically opens to music. Spicy dill pickle chips float out, and lights glowing. And you chow down. And so you eat it. And you're sort of satisfied. Like you're full. But something's missing. You haven't really given your body what it needs. And over the course of our lives, we understand how this can build all sorts of unhealthy patterns in our life. You know, our body gets used to the carb hit. Our body gets used to the sugar high. And it builds this expectation or routine that your body craves. And so we eat it, and we drink it, and we smoke it, and we watch it, and we say it, and we sleep with it, and we buy it. We do all of these things, but it doesn't last because it's not what we really need. And perhaps our faith, our experience of life, the way that we validate ourselves is really dependent whether or not all of our felt needs are met, but not what we really need. In fact, this can often be a problem when interacting with the life of faith. Sometimes we can have a hard time enduring in the life of faith because we have certain felt needs and expectations, like, Jesus, you should be doing this. You should make me feel this way. You know, following Jesus seems simple when everything is going our way, right? When we come into church and the lights are down low and the music gets high, maybe there's a mosh pit in the middle, and you just feel the presence of God and your tearing eyes is so close. It's awesome. You know, maybe a miracle is performed in your life. Praise God, and it strengthens your faith. But what about when there is no miracle, right? What about when there's no good vibes or happy feelings? What about that? What about when there's no bread? And the question we're left with is what we want really Jesus or just the bread he offers? Is what we want really Jesus or is it just the bread he offers? Maybe we've trained ourselves to expect convenience rather than a real revelation of the power of Jesus. And this is what Jesus is doing. He's making a powerful, powerful statement. The crowd was getting hung up on the bread and the signs, but Jesus was operating on a different level. He was trying to show us something different because he knows what we truly need. He knows that we can't satisfy our hunger. He knows in this story that war can't satisfy their hunger. He knows that, we imprint on all of our lives, all the things we do to fill ourselves up, but it doesn't satisfy. But Jesus can. He is the one who knows what is good for us, and he is able to provide it for us. And so the challenge for us is, can we stop being hungry for the bread and start being hungry for Jesus? And I love talking about this story now, this breaking of the bread. We're in John chapter 6. I like talking about after Easter because I don't have to be coy to the build-up of the death and resurrection of Jesus, because I actually think that this whole scene in John chapter 6 is Jesus elaborately and creatively pointing to his work on the cross. It's a symbol, it's a scene he's trying to do. This whole thing is loaded with a message. He's saying that I am not coming to seize, I'm coming to surrender. I'm not going to take, I'm going to give. Jesus himself would say in John chapter 12, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. And so we look at this story in John 6, and this is a story that points back into Israel's history, and then points forward to his death on the cross. Jesus, by multiplying this bread, is making this declaration that I'm the God who provided for you then, and if you thought that was cool, hold my wine, because you haven't seen anything yet. And so he explains himself. The story goes on. After Jesus disappears, Jesus splits, right? What do the crowd do? They go storm chasing again. They go sign chasing again. They get hungry. They want more bread. They want more miracles. And it's here that Jesus kind of disabuses them of their expectations of what this is all going to be. This is how Jesus frames it. He gets really fierce. In verse 27, he says, "Don't labor for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. Don't go chasing bread. Don't go chasing rebellion. Don't go chasing waterfalls." He doesn't say that. Your stomach is always going to be hungry. There's always going to be a Caesar in ruling over this world. Fix your eyes on me. I'm giving myself to you so that you can be made whole. You're chasing things that don't last. You're chasing things that are temporary. I want to give you what's eternal. In fact, Jesus says in verse 35 that I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Church, our deepest hunger is satisfied through the sacrifice of Jesus. This sign, this miraculous multiplication of manna, is pointing to how he is giving himself to us, and that we can only be satisfied by his presence in us. You're not you when you're hungry. Jesus satisfies. And Jesus makes this really real for the crowds. You see, they're following him in classic Jesus fashion. He says, "I am the living bread come down from heaven," in verse 51. "If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I give for the life of the world is my flesh." Huh? Jesus had an interesting way to set these followers straight, right? You want to follow me? You really want to follow me? Why don't you eat my flesh? Do you want life? Do you really want life? Why don't you drink my blood? We should recognize, in fairness, that this crowd wouldn't have understood what Jesus was really saying until they would see him hanging on the cross, giving himself for them, and for you, and for me. Jesus is saying that he is the source. Chase his presence, not just his bread. This is an invitation, friends, into a different way of living. Believe in me and you will never be hungry. It's more than just chasing signs. It's more than just getting the good stuff. We actually find our satisfaction when we share in the road of serving, humility, and suffering that Jesus lived out. That's where we find wholeness and purpose, not in conquering others to get our way, but in giving our life away for the sake of others. If we want to feed on the bread that brings us eternal life, it shouldn't surprise us to find that it looks like dying to self. If we want to be in the presence of Jesus, it shouldn't surprise us that we begin to shift to look and to live like Jesus. So where do you go to get satisfaction? Do you feel like maybe your life, you begin to validate it by how successful you are, and you go from success to success, high to high, blessing to blessing, but you're chasing, you're never satisfied? St. Augustine, this old church father, 1700 years ago, said something like this. He said, "Believe, and you have eaten." Perhaps this moment is a sign, if this is you, that you may need to begin or deepen your commitment to the ways of Jesus, to more wholly accept his lordship over your life. You see, because belief moves us into action. It changes the way that we live. And this is the way to discover his presence. And what we discover is that God has given himself to us. And by it, we are truly and wholly satisfied. Why don't we pray?
Let praise be a weapon that conquers all we claim your victory. Let it rise, let praise arise. We'll see you break down every wall, we'll watch the giants fall. Fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side, forever lift him high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh.
Sing your name in the dark and it changes everything. We'll sing it with all we are and we'll claim your victory. Let it rise, let faith arise. Oh,
We'll see you break down every wall, we'll watch the giants fall. Fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side, forever lift him high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh,
this is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise. We'll see you break down every wall, we'll watch the giants fall. Fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side, forever lift him high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. We'll see you break down every wall, we'll watch the giants fall. Fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side, forever lift him high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you,
You are here, moving in our midst. We worship you, we worship you. You are here, working in this place. We worship you, we worship you. You are here, moving in our midst. We worship you, we worship you. You are here, working in this place. We worship you, we worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you, Lord, I worship you. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. We sing again. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. It's who you are. And you never change. All throughout our lives, even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop, no. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. Oh, yeah. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. Oh, darkness, my God, that is who you are. Sing again. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are.
There is none like you, who could know my heart like you do. All creation sings your song. I will join with them, declaring your glory. There is none like you, who could know my heart like you do. All creation sings your song. I will join with them, declaring your glory. I declare it with all creation, with every breath inside of me. I will sing out your praise. There is none like you, who could know my heart like you do. All creation sings your song. I will join with them, declaring your glory. There is none like you, who could know my heart like you do. All creation sings your song, and I will join with them, declaring your glory, Lord.
We can run straight into your arms, unafraid. 'Cause every time we need you, we're met by love. We can lift our hands to heaven, full of faith. 'Cause every time we worship, we see your face. We can run straight into your hands, unafraid. 'Cause every time we need you, we're made by love. We can lift our hands to heaven, full of faith. 'Cause every time we worship, we see your face.
We see your face.
We see your face.
Oh, we see your face. Oh, every time I sing, I see a new side of who you are. Every time I praise, oh, there is no one like you, Lord. You, Lord. Yeah, there is no one like you, Lord. You, Lord. Come on and sing that. There is no one
You, Lord,
yeah.
you, Lord.
No one like you, none besides you. There is no
There
one.
is no one like
Oh,
you, Lord,
yeah.
you, Lord.
Oh, you are abundance. You are.
There is no one like
There's no one like you,
you,
God. There's nothing like your love, overflowing, and it's for me. Oh,
There is no one like
there's no one runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. It's your love, your love, your love. We can run straight into your arms, unafraid. 'Cause every time we need you, we're led by love. We can lift our hands to heaven, full of faith. 'Cause every time we worship, yes, we see your face. We can run straight into your arms, unafraid. 'Cause every time we need you, we're met by love. We can lift our hands to heaven, full of faith. 'Cause every time we worship, we see your